Welcome back, everyone. Next up, we have Todos Medical Ltd. It trades on the OTCQB under the symbol TOMDF, and it engineers life-saving diagnostic solutions for the early detection of a variety of cancers. Please welcome its CEO, Gerald Commissiong. Welcome, Gerald.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks everyone for joining. Today, we announced some very significant news with regards to completing the acquisition of the assets of NLC Pharma and the formation of the subsidiary controlled by Todos called 3CL Pharma. That announcement really, is the centerpiece of our overall strategy, where we've been funding the development and commercialization of some truly incredible products as they related to the 3CL protease. And I'm going to spend some time on that. But I want first to make sure everyone understands how we're structured as a company now, Todos. So here are the forward-looking statements, safe harbor, and the cautionary legend. So with regards to Todos Medical, we are a revenue-producing company. So we make money now by selling materials and supplies related to COVID testing and by doing COVID testing ourselves. That's our primary source of revenue. We also have certain key proprietary diagnostics that we are going to be bringing back into the market in 2023 and 2024 that will allow us to further drive our revenue from that CLIA lab that we currently have that is generating revenue. And between now, where we're primarily doing COVID testing, and when we launch our proprietary breast cancer test, we're now in the process of expanding our test menu to be able to do other tests such as UTI, STD, certain key sepsis tests. We're in discussions for bringing some proprietary ones and validating them, bringing them to the market, cancer genetic testing, pharmacogenomic testing, as well as other tests that the marketplace is looking to bring into the market. So that's where we are, right now with regards to the lab. And then underneath all of that, incredibly important diagnostic work, we have this just tremendous majority-owned asset in a subsidiary called 3CL Pharma. And that is developing the antivirals, the dietary supplement antiviral products, as well as the testing new ways of looking at COVID. So it's really, a story where we've got revenue in Todos through way of testing and sales of COVID-related testing products. We're expanding that revenue base by offering not just COVID, but other necessary high-value tests that our clients are starting to ask for, so we can deliver a more comprehensive offering. And we're building that test menu to ultimately be able to service our cancer business, which is why Todos was created. And we're going to be bringing proprietary cancer tests into the market in 2023. So that's exciting. And then underneath that, we have just this jewel, 3CL Pharma, that is majority controlled subsidiary of Todos that we're going to be looking to create value with and ultimately either bring into the parent level or monetize in some form or fashion in the months and years ahead. So with that, I'm going to get into the testing business just so we understand what the objective is in the short term, medium term, and long term for Todos. And the company Todos, which is a testing company, as compared with the company 3CL Pharma, which is really an antiviral company. So just a little bit about the market that Todos testing, PCR testing, is going after. Todos is COVID is now, it's a pandemic. It's turning to epidemic. We know that it's going to be with us for the long haul. It's not going away because obviously we don't have a zero COVID strategy here in the U.S. Obviously, there's significant vaccination in the United States, over 500 million doses given. Several people are, hundreds of millions of people are now considered, quote unquote, fully vaccinated, although we all know the term waning immunity is something that is of we all know now, and some of us knew a couple of years ago that this would eventually happen with regards to vaccines for coronaviruses. And worldwide, obviously, slightly less on a percentage basis, but billions of doses given. Several billions are considered fully vaccinated, although again, that number is not necessarily increasing. But there's risks because the vaccination obviously has not stopped the transmission of COVID. So people are still getting COVID, even if you've been vaccinated, although the severity is less. Long COVID, whether you've been vaccinated or not, is still a very significant risk, although somewhat reduced in vaccinated individuals. And new variants that we just saw, for example, with Omicron, and now we have the subvariant of Omicron, BA2. We're seeing that they're changing how we engage with regards to immunity for COVID, insofar as we went from, vaccines protect against infection to, well, vaccines primarily purpose is to prevent for hospitalization and death. And we'll see how that purpose of the vaccines evolve over time. Certainly better to be vaccinated than not vaccinated, but it's very unclear how successful this vaccine strategy is going to be over the long haul. One, because we're going to need to have more people continue to get vaccinated on an ongoing basis, and there is some controversy around that. And then two, we obviously need to see how well these vaccines will protect against new variants that we don't know yet, that are inevitably going to be variants that escape the vaccine immunity. Otherwise, they would not become variants of concern. And this is most important for those who are at greatest risk. So that's, the Americans who are 65 and over, and especially 80 and over, the immune compromised. But really, it's everybody, because as we're finding out, a lot of people don't know they're immune compromised until they get a type of immune challenge like COVID. And then it's at that point that they find that they have a weakness in their immune system. And that's what we're experiencing now with long COVID. So, there's a lot going on, and we want to be there to support people to help mitigate this to the extent possible, and lead to better outcomes with products. So with that in mind, our revenue-producing product and services are our Provista Diagnostics COVID testing services and our Corona Diagnostics testing business. Overall, our testing revenue between Q3 of 2020 and Q3 of 2021 grew almost at 500%. In our own CLIA lab, where we do testing services, we have capacity of 25,000 tests per day, and we expect that once we complete the validation of the Lumira DX PCR test, we could potentially double that capacity to 50,000 tests a day, and we're in the middle of validating that now. So as we've discussed for a long time, our objective is to be able to do large-scale testing in mass for institutional clients, and that's where our focus is. Our average revenue per test is about $80. We can get up to $250. With reference lab agreements, it's south of $80. But really, and when that's been most of our business, and reimbursement on a standard basis about $123, inclusive of sample collection. So we can do mass testing now. We're doing significant testing now. We're working on winning additional contracts as it relates to testing. And we see this, as we've engaged with clients, becoming more important. Because our daily volume is ranged from anywhere between 500 and 5,000 tests per day, and so we're looking to normalize that higher. That's our objective. So as we move forward, really making sure that we do our PCR testing and our other related COVID testing, and then being able to do the other tests that those groups that we're engaging with will need. So, one of the things that we've done in this area for expansion is we're bringing on these other tests so we can go to self-insureds, for example, who are now, becoming more concerned about the health and wellness of their employees. So they want to be able to monitor health, which requires, diagnostic testing, and then be able to have some degree of support or ideas about how to improve health as time goes on. that's something that, we think we can do and we have solutions for, especially as it relates to COVID. And we see this trend of, people needing COVID, and because they need COVID, well, why don't I just do all of my testing with you? And we've experienced that from our clients, and so we're responding to that by expanding our test menu. In terms of the services, the key, of course, is that we can provide ultra fast turnaround. So we've now opened up to be able to take testing at our site at the Provista lab down in Atlanta. So we can give testing turnaround within 4 hours, 8 hours, and typically within 24 hours when we take from across the country. So that that's our purpose and our focus. We've hired the lab staff significantly to be able to manage this, and we're also bringing on additional commercialization expertise so that we can continue to build out our sales and our funnel and get more conversions on a bigger lot of tests, not just COVID, but other tests as well, because COVID is quite cyclical. And then, of course, we have our legacy reagent sales business where we supply other labs with COVID testing. And as we've done that successfully, we built 6 labs across the country. Much like our lab, other labs are being asked the same things to be able to expand the menu, to be able to offer different types of tests. And so we have gotten into position to be able to go out and source what's required to run those other tests so that we can have distributor pricing, not just for the COVID testing, but for other testing, and we can expand our revenue by offering our clients these other test menus. So that's something that we're continuing to build out over time. We do expect potentially some partnerships here in terms of the distribution because Todos is going to be focusing most of its effort on building out its CLIA lab, expanding our test menu, and then getting ready for the launch of Videssa. Corona Diagnostics, which is a side business related but not identical that distributes to Provista and to other labs. That business we see potentially expanding in a variety of ways that support both Provista as well as the other labs and driving revenue there. And obviously, it's always good to keep your ear to the ground in terms of what's going on in the lab industry. And so we have that competitive intelligence with that asset. So that's where we are on the revenue side. We see that growing substantially. We had a very, very good fourth quarter. We had a very good start to the first quarter here, although obviously COVID testing has gone down. That's kind of plateaued, and we see it starting to pick up again. So what we've been doing, and I give credit to our sales team, especially Andrew Blumenthal, he's been out there engaging with companies that do sample collection, getting them to move over to our lab because we can provide a premium service. And now we are expanding our test menu through reference, and then over time being able to bring that in-house. And we are bringing on chief commercial officer expertise to really drive this and prepare the marketplace for Videssa in the future. So with that, now we can talk about what that future looks like with our proprietary testing pipeline. So as we grow revenues, we want to get it to a stable, at least $2 to $3 million a month in revenue out of Provista, which we've been there. It's come down. Now we see ourselves consolidating, and we see it starting to come back a little bit. And we think that we can drive it higher, especially as we expand our test menu. Now the focus is on a year from now. So we've continued to expand our testing. We stabilized with regards to where we get samples from for COVID, so that we can both create revenue and then are ready for the spikes if we have to, up to 50,000 tests per day. We've expanded our test menu for the other tests, and now a year from now, we are already engaged with oncologists who are ordering tests related to breast cancer for us, and now we're launching our own proprietary test directly through the same channels that we are building right now. So when you talk about Videssa, which really is going to be the focus of the initial launch of the commercial efforts, it's critical that we understand exactly where the value of Videssa, could be. And so what we're going after is the breast cancer market. The initial area where we see potential value is post-mammogram, because mammogram is the standard of care. Obviously, millions of women get mammograms on an annual basis, 30 million. About 40%, and this is the target we're going after initially, about 40% of those women, 12 million, who undergo a mammogram, get an inconclusive result, a BI-RADS 3 or BI-RADS 4. And that is indicative of dense breast. And when we say that, what that means is basically the physiology, the way it's structured, the breast is dense, and therefore the image, you can't get a proper image using mammography. If you can't get a proper image, you can't do a proper reading, and therefore you get an inconclusive result. That happens to about 40% of women, and testing for post-mammogram is about a $7 billion a year business. This issue of dense breasts is such a big problem that 32 states have actually enacted legislation requiring providers to inform patients that they do have dense breasts. And the reason for that is that this was abused in the past. So if you have an inconclusive result, women obviously get scared. There's concern that it could be cancer. There are many additional tests that you have to do, ultimately leading to a biopsy. That process can take several weeks, which obviously adds to the fear, and can cost on average $6,000 all the way through the biopsy. And there's potential negative side effects of the additional tests as well as the biopsy. And so this is quite a challenge in the marketplace. And the solution that we are bringing forward is a blood screening test that can be used after someone has an inconclusive mammogram to give them a better resolution as to whether or not they truly are at higher risk for breast cancer. So when you look at the data that we've shown here, in dense breast, we show a 94.9% sensitivity and a 98.4% negative predictive value as it relates to breast cancer. So, when we tell you that you're positive for breast cancer, 94.9% of the time, that's an accurate diagnosis. When we tell you that you don't have breast cancer, negative predictive value, 98.4% of the time, that's accurate. These are very, very high numbers, and in the estimation of our chief scientific officer, these are some of the best numbers out there in the marketplace ever. And obviously, we're very, very pleased to be able to bring this forward. When you look at what that means, ultimately, is the potentially reduction in biopsy. So on a combined basis, we see that we could potentially reduce biopsies by 45.9%, which is huge, given that the biopsy market is quite significant and has a number of side effects. If you can bring down biopsies by 45%, you would have a major impact on the care of breast cancer. So it's important to note that in this, that Videssa has had over $50 million invested into it. There were 3 completed prospective trials using gold standard GCP, good clinical practices. There was an initial launch without unique CPT codes that relied on a code stacking strategy. And it was successful insofar as they got a lot of people to use it, but it was a failure because they didn't get paid. So they were so successful that they put themselves out of business. Okay, that's effectively what happened. So now the new data has since been published since that effort, really underscoring, it's one of the 3 publications, underscoring the clinical value of the test. And our next step with regards to this is engaging with CMS to see if we can get limited reimbursement for a study that will allow for reimbursement with a unique CPT code. So that's the next step for Videssa with regards to FDA and CMS here in the United States. We are planning to do a clinical study in Mexico over the next 12 months that will allow us to get commercialization authorization, so regulatory authorization in Mexico and Latin America, as well as other jurisdictions outside the United States, and support the revalidation of the assay in our lab, and then the launch on a cash pay basis of the Videssa test into the marketplace. The initial targets, as you would note, The test that we're going to be doing is an all-comers test, because the data we have is not only in dense breast, but also in non-dense breast. So if you look at the sensitivity in non-dense breast, you have a 92% sensitivity and the same 98.4% negative predictive value. So from our perspective, as we look at this data, we see, quite significant clinical utility for this for women in a different setting. So maybe not dense breast, but for women who are younger, who are not eligible for mammograms. That's certainly one opportunity. The other opportunity, of course, is women who previously had breast cancer who want to monitor to make sure it's not coming back. So those are the markets where we see potentially significant market opportunity for Videssa. We won't get too much into the other tests that are in our portfolio, other than to say we also have an Alzheimer's blood test that we'll be reading out sometime in the next several months. This test, we believe Alzheimer's is basically cancer of non-dividing cells. So they go and they prepare, they create two cellular infrastructures, two sets of nuclei, and then when they try to divide, they can't. And because they can't divide, they overproduce proteins, and that's basically what you're seeing with the amyloid and the tau misfolded. It's an overproduction trying to save the cell. And that's one of the reasons why we think targeting amyloid may not be the best idea with regards to Alzheimer's, because we view these as potentially protective proteins, or they're trying to be protective proteins. And the root cause is actually cell cycle dysregulation. And then the question becomes, what triggers that cell cycle dysregulation, which is a different question. We're identifying for the presence of actual Alzheimer's disease, not the risk of Alzheimer's disease. This will ultimately become a risk test on a clinical basis, because Alzheimer's progresses for a long time before you have symptoms. So from a physician's perspective, a healthy person will come in, they'll take the test, it'll show positive, they'll say, well, I don't have Alzheimer's. Well, you don't have the clinical manifestation of Alzheimer's yet. But if you do have Alzheimer's and you know that it's coming, there are potentially some things you can do from a lifestyle perspective, or you can enter into certain clinical trials to see if you can be part of a study that reduces the progression of the disease. Also, there are amyloid therapies that are on the market today, however effective or ineffective they may be. And certainly physicians who have patients who want these therapies would like to be able to triage them to know whether or not they have an opportunity to work. And we showed with our data, we showed a 0.0002 value, P equals 0.0002 with regards to the statistical significance of LIMPRO as compared with amyloid PET. And we saw an R value of 0.85, where if you take the outliers out, which were, obviously true positives and true negatives, you would get almost a straight line, about 0.95, in terms of how correlated the LIMPRO scores are with amyloid PET. And the cutoff also is very highly correlated with the clinical manifestations. So we are excited about the first set of data we had that we got in 2019, and we're getting the confirmatory data here in the first half of this year for the Alzheimer's test. So that's very exciting. And we do have a general cancer screening test. We have a CE mark for breast cancer and colon cancer, but this TBIA is an AI-driven spectroscopy-based blood test that can ultimately detect potentially not only all cancers, but anything that has an immune dysfunction, because it creates a fingerprint of the disease, and that's what we're reading out on. So the initial focus of this technology is in cancer, and specifically breast cancer. Our strategy in terms of bringing this into the market is to piggyback on the Videssa, so that every time someone runs a Videssa test, you get a Videssa result. You also get a TBIA result that we use for research purposes. And then over time, as we get more and more Videssa data, we also build out data to support our AI platform. And ultimately, down the line, they may be combined, or the TBIA may take over from Videssa once it gets trained enough. But that will also allow us to identify other cancers. And so patient flow is critical for this. We think breast cancer is a great way for us to start to access this. Now that we've spoken about our revenue-producing assets, and we've spoken about our Videssa test, which is really a crown jewel as the company moves forward towards being a leader in the space of breast cancer diagnostics, we can now come to really the exciting opportunity that, a lot of people are referring to as almost as a call option inside Todos, which is 3CL Pharma, which could be revolutionary with regards to COVID-19. So a little bit about 3CL and why we use that name. So 3CL protease is a critical protease that drives replication in coronaviruses. Okay, it's a virally encoded enzyme. It is absolutely required for virus replication and transmission. It is conserved across all nidovirus coronaviruses. And the key is it's got a unique cleavage target preference. So the virus enters the cell, the virus makes a lot of copies of itself that are all clumped together because it makes them faster. Then the 3CL protease are the scissors that cut those polyproteins into mature proteins, and those active mature proteins go out and infect other cells. So if you inhibit that 3CL protease, you stop it from being able to cut itself, and therefore you don't get active proteins that can go out and infect other cells. This is the exact mechanism of action that Pfizer's Paxlovid works through, and why we believe that they had so much success in their outpatient trial. And this is the exact mechanism that our suite of products, Tolavir, and Tolavir Daily work through this mechanism of inhibiting the 3CL protease. Okay, so this is critical. And the other things that are important to know here, so when you look at HIV, HIV was also addressed primarily with protease inhibitors. So it's very important to understand that protease inhibitors are a fundamental part of the arsenal to protect against or to kill viruses. And that's what we're going after with these inhibitors. The other thing that the 3CL protease does is it actually goes out and it's responsible for a couple of other things besides viral replication. It's also responsible for turning off the local cellular immune response so that you get infected. Obviously, you have an innate immune system that is seeking to respond to that infection. And the protease actually cleaves a cell surface receptor called NFK beta, essential modulator, or NEMO. That is the cell surface receptor for NFK beta. And NFK beta is basically the local alarm system for a cellular alarm system. So when you turn that off, the virus is able to go about its business uninhibited. And really the first thing the virus does when it comes into the body is it produces massive amounts of 3CL in order to turn off the immune system throughout the rest of the body so that the virus has more airtime to replicate. And this is a key feature of not just SARS-CoV-2, but all nidovirus coronaviruses. SARS-CoV-2 just does it extremely efficiently. There's more than 70x times the number of 3CL protease particles as there are viral particles as the body's gaining steam. And so, turning off this protease is critical if you want to start the immune system. And so we think that, this is a critical mechanism. The other thing that the 3CL has a role in stimulating an innate immune response. So one of the problems in COVID is you have a hyperimmune response because, of course, by the time the immune system realizes that COVID is there, it's overtaken it. However, if you're taking 3CL protease inhibitors while the virus is replicating, you slow that replication dramatically by the inhibitor alone, but you also allow the innate immune response to turn on. And therefore, by turning on in response to a smaller amount of virus and picking up steam in a more measured way, you potentially mitigate the hyperimmune response that leads to cytokine storm. And so that's the other key feature of the 3CL protease. So as we look at this, we continue to see and believe that 3CL protease is an important aspect of apoptosis. It's also an important aspect of inflammation. Now, in terms of in vitro 3CL protease inhibition, I'll just spend a brief moment on this. The colors here that you see on the left is really a chart of how well the products are able to inhibit the protease. And so we see Tolavir created a full inhibition of the 40 micromolar of the 3CL protease. There's about a 90% inhibition with the Tolavir product, and about a 27% inhibition with the Tolavir daily. Pfizer's 3CL protease inhibitor compounds. This one is not the exact Paxlovid, but it's very similar. You see that they're slightly more concentrated, but the key, of course, is that you have to get to a point where you inhibit it enough and to have a meaningful impact. And we definitely see that with the Pfizer compounds, and we see that with the Tolavir and the Tolavir. We don't see that with the Tolavir daily quite as much. What we do see with the Tolavir daily is that if you have it in your system ahead of time, we think that it could be potentially helpful. Although it's important to note that neither Tolavir nor Tolavir daily are approved to diagnose, treat, prevent, or cure COVID. We have to make sure we say that. Or Tolavir is being investigated as a potential therapy for COVID. And we are looking at potential ways to make the Tolavir product an OTC product that would have that claim, although we are not there yet. The other thing that's important to note when you're looking at this is the IC50 binding strength. And you see here, for those in the crowd that have heard about ivermectin, obviously there is something to ivermectin as it relates to 3CL protease inhibition. However, it's not very strong. And given how much the 3CL protease is replicating, and expanding in COVID, you do need something much stronger in order to be able to take it. So people who've said they've taken ivermectin very, very early or prophylactically in the course of their disease and it's helped them, I believe that is the case. Notwithstanding that, most people would not be able to take the quantity of ivermectin needed to have that impact. And so just, when you look at the dosing required versus toxicity profile, it doesn't appear that there's much of a therapeutic window for ivermectin in COVID. With that said, people are using it and there may be something there that they see. We see definitely much more significant binding with our Tolavir daily product. It's about 2.5 times stronger. Our Tolavir maximum strength is over 10 times stronger. And our Tolavir is about 25 times stronger than ivermectin. So as we looked at the different models and the in vitro assays, we saw that Tolavir had the same inhibition capacity or very similar from a clinical perspective as Paxlovid. And so that's where we see benefit. And with one of the other key things is that these products that we have, Tolavir and the Tolavir, were discovered targeting the active site. And just, from a biological perspective, the active site is where a molecule binds with the other compound that it's engaging with. So, the 3CL protease, obviously it has to bind with the virus in order to have the polyproteins become active proteins and mature proteins. And it also has to bind with NFK beta, NEMO, in order to turn off the local cellular immune response. So our Tolavir actually gets in between that and stops that binding. And that's really what the objective is, so that the protease just bounces off and goes away. So that's the objective. We see that Paxlovid does not attach to the active binding site, although it doesn't attach to the active site. It does attach to binding sites, which we believe could, at some point, be affected by mutations. The active site, we believe, is less likely to be affected by mutation because of the fact that it needs to bind. With that said, that has not yet happened with Paxlovid, and Paxlovid is a good product targeted at the outpatient market. Now, let's talk about the product that we have on the market, Tolavir dietary supplement. So this can be bought today on Amazon, can be bought today at mytolavir.com. We originally acquired exclusive distribution rights to the dietary supplement. Now, obviously, that they sit in the subsidiary 3CL. We launched it initially at the Alchemist Kitchen in New York. It's the only known commercial product to directly inhibit the 3CL protease. And this has been verified now in multiple labs, including ours and some universities we collaborate with, and some independent universities that have looked at it. So, as a dietary supplement product, we were also given the claim that it impacts the 3CL protease. And we're the only dietary supplement product on the market that does that. The only other product that's approved to inhibit the 3CL protease is Pfizer's Paxlovid. So we see this product, this dietary supplement product, gaining steam. We've certainly had a lot more visibility on it. Today, when we made the announcement, we were finally able to disclose that Some very prominent people have taken it. Guitarist Carlos Santana did take Tolavir. We sent it to him when he tested positive. His wife had taken it previously, and ultimately she never tested positive. Obviously, we can't necessarily attribute this to Tolavir, and we can't attribute necessarily the good outcome for Carlos to Tolavir, but it is important to note that they did take the product. And obviously with their video that they allowed us to put on our channels, we're very supportive, and we think that over time we can establish a deeper relationship with them. This is really pioneered by Dr. Arad, who's the inventor and the pioneer of all this 3CL protease work. Dr. Arad's son, Kobe, who actually works with Carlos because he's a musician. And so they worked closely together. He introduced the product, and we were very happy that we were able to help them, and ultimately that they're both doing okay. Now, moving to beyond our dietary supplement product and focusing on our Tolavir. So we completed phase 2 studies, a phase 2 study for Tolavir in the treatment of hospitalized patients. It's important to note that Tolavir is different than Tolavir because we also added an anti-cytokine component to Tolavir above and beyond the 3CL protease mechanism that acts on the cytokine. So this NLCEXT2, we know it has data that's published that shows that it reduces IL-6 as well as several other key markers associated with cytokine storm. And so this combination of 3CL protease inhibition together with anti-cytokine activity appears to be a very powerful mechanism, so you can stop the negative feedback loop associated with hospitalizations that can ultimately lead to intubations and death. So a little bit about the late-stage oral antivirals in development. Obviously, we have our Tolavir product that's getting ready for a phase 2/3 in hospitalized patients. It's an oral pill. The mechanisms, as I mentioned, are anti-3CL and anti-cytokine. We are planning to file an IND in the U.S., and we are preparing now an EUA submission for Greece. And then if we get approval in Greece, we think we can quickly get approval in Israel. So we're having those conversations now in a hospitalized setting and targeting approval in second and third tier countries where a lower bar for approvability may be there, especially with a very safe compound such as our botanical Tolavir product. So we had positive phase 2 data. The product that really Tolavir is looking to, I would not necessarily replace, but at least add to, is remdesivir, because it's for hospitalized patients. Most of the other oral antivirals are for the outpatient. So remdesivir is given via the IV route, although they are trying to reformulate that into an oral. And it has an RDRP antiviral mechanism. So in the hospitalized setting, the trial did not meet statistical significance, although it did have a shorter recovery time. So it is the standard of care in hospitalized patients. And it did show some pretty significant benefit in pre-hospital. So later stage patients who were not doing well before they were admitted to the hospital, there was a significant reduction in hospitalization with remdesivir. We believe that Tolavir also will be able to target that, after the initial phase with the cytokine, but before you're in the hospital. We think that Tolavir will have benefit there. And that is the reason why Gilead is going after this market, pre-hospital and going after an oral formulation. We already have an oral formulation. And we think that we can definitely have a significant impact, similar, if not better, than what we see with remdesivir, although we have to do some studies there to prove that. We also, with regards to Tolavir, we are looking at other areas. So the moderate to severe, which would compare with what I just described, pediatrics, because it's a botanical product that has a very strong safety profile, and ultimately long COVID, although long COVID, there may be some of our other products may have benefit there, given what we're hearing and seeing in the marketplace and from people who've used them. Obviously, we have in the outpatient setting molnupiravir and Paxlovid. Those are both approved for right after, within the first 5 days after a diagnosis of a symptomatic infection. They're both initially approved for unvaccinated, although we think that they will work in vaccinated. And this is an area where we do think Tolavir would be successful, but where we also see the potential for Tolavir to move into if supported by clinical studies. So ultimately, we think we could have 2 oral antivirals on the market, and we're working hard to differentiate them and put them into a format that could allow them to be approved by regulators. Just a little bit about, this was the Tolavir clinical study, observational study done at Leniado Hospital in Israel. We saw with the use of the Tolavir, not the Tolavir, but the Tolavir, we saw a reduction in mean time in the hospital by 4 days. We saw, no deaths as compared with 5 deaths in the observed group. And we saw a deteriorated to respirator 0 in our group versus 3 in the observed group. And there was also a very significant reduction in biomarker. So this is the Tolavir, and this is what got us interested in looking at potential prescription product and ultimately the next studies that we did. This is not a study that allowed for approval, although obviously the results are very positive. It was observational, not placebo-controlled. But given that this is the same dietary supplement product that's out on the market, we were very pleased to see these results. We can't use this in marketing, but we can share it with investors, and so that's why we're doing it. And this really set the stage for the reformulation for the Tolavir product. And so here we just completed this study. We announced the data towards the end of January. This is a double-blinded, placebo-controlled clinical trial in hospitalized patients versus the standard of care, which included remdesivir and dexamethasone. And so the results that we saw here in this 20-patient study were a 7-day reduction, not 3 days like Tolavir study, but a 7-day reduction in hospitalization. We saw, all-cause death. So there was there was a death unrelated to COVID in the treatment group. The patient came in with a stroke. They stabilized. So when you see in this data set, time to clinical improvement, all of the patients in the Tolavir group improved and got to stability. After treatment was completed, the patient got worse and passed weeks after Tolavir was withdrawn because we were only allowed to treat for 10 days. And what that tells us, of course, is that we want to continue to treat the patient. We don't want to treat them and then have them come off the therapy. But there were 0 deaths in the Tolavir group while on therapy. Okay, and that's critical. Versus 33% all cause in the placebo group. And they had one who passed in an unrelated or after the treatment window on the placebo. And so as it related to on therapy, there was 0% death versus 22% death while on therapy in this study. There was a 9% intubation versus 33% intubation. Again, the intubation was related to the stroke that the patient had in the treatment group. And then we also saw a reduction in need for supplemental oxygen, as well as if you were on supplemental oxygen, you weren't on it for as long in the Tolavir group. And importantly, we saw significant improvement in biomarkers across the entire spectrum of biomarkers, whether that was C-reactive protein, IL-6, D-dimer, across the whole spectrum, we saw improvement. So, the key, of course, is we saw improvement in time to stable disease. So this includes patients who died, of course. The time to stable disease does not include patients who died. So obviously the patients who died are the ones that take a lot longer. And so that's what really extended from 11 days to 17 days. And then from 8.3 days to 10 days in the treatment group. We met the primary endpoint, secondary clinical endpoint, obviously reduction of time in the hospital, which is really the key endpoint for payers. A 7-day reduction of hospitalization is extremely significant. Obviously, COVID-related deaths while on therapy, 0 COVID-related deaths on therapy versus 2 in the treatment group. That was very important. And obviously, we saw improvement across all the biomarkers. So it's very exciting for us. And so now, as we move forward, we had a mortality benefit in the phase 2 randomized clinical trial. We obviously saw a significant reduction in hospitalization. So what we're doing now is we're preparing to apply for EUAs in the phase 2/3 trial, and for EUAs in certain jurisdictions, starting with Greece, and then preparing for the pivotal phase 2/3 afterwards. We're also looking at additional development plans in pediatric hospitalized COVID, moderate COVID to prevent people from going to the hospital, and then also looking at pediatric COVID. And we are also looking at potential uses of Tolavir, the dietary supplement product, in some of these areas, and figuring out which one is really the best to move forward based upon the profile. And so as that's moving forward, all the data that we're gathering is valuable. And in fact, we will be reaching out to some customers to get customer feedback as part of an IRB-sponsored, IRB-sanctioned, study that could give us information that would allow us to begin to make claims as it relates to Tolavir. So expect, if some of folks are on the phone here or on the line here who have taken Tolavir, expect that we may reach out to you by email to fill out some surveys to help us in terms of getting the necessary information to be able to say more about Tolavir. And ultimately, if we can do that, we think that'll drive sales. And then finally, we'll just touch on this briefly, although this will become increasingly important as time goes on. The Tola test, that's how we originally got into the 3CL protease and bought into the biology. We have a test that actually measures the level of 3CL protease. And if you don't have any 3CL protease in your system, basically it's telling us that the virus is no longer replicating and you're just getting rid of it. Versus if you have replicating virus, even if you're not symptomatic, we know that you can infect other people. And so this is critically important to improve the resolution of both an antigen test by finding people earlier, because we showed in a study that we ran that we could identify people as early as PCR with this test. And then on the back end, when you let people out of quarantine, this test will tell you whether someone is still infected versus currently, we all heard the CDC say 5 days, only to be disproven by their own data a few months later. And nobody believed 5 days to begin with. And so, there's a real quandary about how do you standardize release from quarantine based on the fact that you can go out and infect other people, especially with the potential of new, more severe variants coming about. We think this 3CL protease test is the solution, and that would add resolution to the PCR test, because a PCR test can stay positive for a long time if your body is having a tough time clearing the virus, which obviously people with downregulated immune systems don't have the immune system to go out and kill the virus and get rid of it. And so it lingers for a while longer, although it may not be infective. And that's the key. Our management team, the key people here, of course, are Dr. Dorit Arad, who's the Chief Technology Officer of 3CL Sciences. She's the inventor of all the pills and the science underlying the Tola test. And Dr. Jorge Leon, who's a previous executive at Quest Diagnostics, who's helping to drive the Videssa strategy forward and bringing that into market. He's brought 4 breast cancer tests to market, and he believes that our test could be the best test. So in summary, we've got an expanding revenue base via our current CLIA COVID tests. We've got new proprietary tests that will be starting in the market next year. And so we're building in anticipation of Videssa coming to market and really changing the standard of care in breast cancer in the years ahead. We've got an expanding dietary supplement brand and exciting new product offerings. One of the things that we have been hearing from customers are actually a lot of long COVID customers that have come to us and told us that they have benefit. And we've now been approached by several patient advocacy groups whose members have had benefit and are trying to get a better understanding of how they may be able to engage with us and how we may be able to run studies to help them, because there's really 2 things going on with long COVID. One, there's the viral persistence, where we think Tolavir could have benefit with. And then there's the autoantibodies, where potentially some aspects of Tolavir may have some benefit. And then obviously there's the potential that viral persistence is triggering autoantibodies, and it's a cycle. And if you can stop the virus, then maybe you can stop that cycle. So it's still unclear. It's a little murky what's going on with long COVID, but there's at least 2 groups, autoantibodies and viral persistence. And we have seen some people tell us that they've had benefit. And so it is something that we need to explore, because we think long COVID is going to be really the chronic disease that comes out of the COVID. So if you have 5, 10, 15, 20% of people who get COVID who end up with long COVID, especially with reinfections, if you get back to the Omicron days of 1 million people getting infected per day, then you're ending up with 50,000, 100,000, or 200,000, chronic disabled people every day from that wave. And that's what we're seeing on social media. That's what we're seeing in the literature now. And so it's something that is going to have to be addressed. And I think governments are not really understanding the potential impact, because we've heard things and we predicted that, if long COVID does increase Alzheimer's, if long COVID does increase cancer, if long COVID does increase cardiovascular risk, I mean, these are the big spends for Medicare. And if long COVID does these things, there's going to be huge potential costs to the system. So we're going to be executing strategic partnerships. Yes, we will be looking for partners for our Tola branded products, for those people asking. And we brought on government help to facilitate that. And we believe we have pretty clear regulatory pathways, whether it's with the existing data in certain jurisdictions or the next set of data that we'll get in other jurisdictions. So with that, I'll stop and I'll open the floor to questions. I think it went a little long today.
Well, you have a lot of good information to share. So it did, but let's jump right into these questions and we'll go over a little bit. Sean May says, the recent hire, Greg Meiselbach, has an impressive resume of lobbying in the United States and a Far East connection. China's cases are exploding. Any thoughts on China? And what regions do you see him targeting in the short run and the medium term?
Right. So obviously China, is a huge market. And we obviously believe that we can, get into any market. The question is, what level of data will we have to have before we get an approval? We think it's unlikely China is going to approve, our product until we have larger, broader studies. And so we think that would be one of the jurisdictions where we would have to complete the phase 2-3 before we could get an approval. With that said, we do believe that that is a big time market. That's just one of the areas that we're focusing on. Greg's got tremendous relationships in government and not just government, but in companies that engage with governments throughout the world. And so there are other Southeast Asian countries where we think we could have some benefit. For example, we have a subsidiary in Singapore and there's been some expression of interest about the product there. We're obviously already engaged with Greece. We're based in Israel. And he's got relationships with several other governments throughout the world, both Africa, Southeast Asia, and South America, where there's potential benefit. So that's where the target is going to be. And whether it's a deal with a government or a deal with a quasi-government agency or a deal with a government-sponsored corporation, because as in many countries, governments actually invest in companies or facilitate the development of companies bringing things to market. Greg's got that background and he'll be driving that forward for us.
Thank you for that. Camille Reed says, the company seemed to get a lot of FaceTime with celebrities at the celebrity flag football game. Do you have any sort of programs in place to onboard these celebrities? And what would a celebrity or influencer deal actually look like? And do you have any discussion with Carlos Santana?
Right. So we do have a program in place to onboard celebrities. We've actually established an affiliate program where, if someone is part of the affiliate program and people buy via them, through some electronic portal format, they will get, a concession, a commission on that. So we do have that, and we're expanding that. Actually, that's actually been popular with physicians and chiropractors and naturopaths. And so we see that growing there. With regards to what a deal might look like, so typically, if we're going to be able to promote the likeness of a celebrity, and we are in discussions with several now from that celebrity sweat. So, we're talking to the agents. We've sent over samples. The agents are talking to other people to make sure the product is credible and wanted to get their scientists to dig in so that they know that, it's real what we're selling. And all of those conversations are going very well. We are, there would be some kind of monthly minimum royalty, so like a monthly fee for them to come in and for them to promote. We could bring them in for commercials and other collateral, and they would come on for events, potentially participate with investors. That's kind of what it is. So it's like a monthly type of salary, which we define as a minimum royalty. Then obviously, if they exceed their minimum royalty through the affiliate program by increasing sales, then they get that upside beyond that minimum royalty. And then there'd be some stock, so they could participate in the upside of the equity through the benefit of their celebrity. So that's the kind of deal structure. And yes, of course, we've been in, we know our people know Carlos quite well. And yes, we are in discussions. How that's going to play out, of course, I can't disclose, but certainly he's been a supporter of ours, and we've had conversations.
Great. Mark Roberts says there's a lot of message board chatter about using Tolavir in long COVID. People are writing testimonials that it works with long COVID. So what are the company's plans to capitalize on these anecdotal reports?
So we are in discussions about that. Again, one of the things that we're doing, and actually the long COVID is what drove us to do this with regards to Tolavir, is this IRB sanctioned retrospective study where we go out to people who used it. We ask them why they used it, how they used it, did it help them? And that is the kind of data that we'll be gathering, so we could create a base, what kind of dosing regimen that they use, so we can create a base of activity. Certainly, we think long COVID is a massive, massive, massive opportunity that potentially could be bigger than COVID. And the challenge, of course, is, as I mentioned, there's the viral problem triggering some kind of autoimmune response, and then the autoimmune response furthering itself. And whether there's a tail of the virus needing to trigger it, or whether the autoimmunity in and of itself, by itself, is an issue. So we are deeply embedded in the literature and in conversations with long COVID doctors about this issue. We do think that there's probably going to be a subset that Tolavir, just the 3-cell protease inhibitor, not the anti-cytokine that Tolavir has, which Tolavir daily has some of that anti-cytokine. But that's a separate issue. We believe that there is definitely a place. We don't know how to segment that market yet, although we are looking at biomarkers, which could play into our Provista. People wanting to get tested to understand whether they have autoantibodies, which there are some autoantibody tests that are percolating up the food chain that we could bring in as LDTs and validate. There are also viral persistence tests, which don't really capture in the upper respiratory tract, but you probably capture more from stool samples to see if, someone still has active replicating virus or virus in the stool, kind of like wastewater, to be able to tell whether that could be one of the causes of long COVID. And we think, maybe, to get started, if you had a benefit in 50% of patients, obviously that's a heck of a lot better than 0, which is what's out there now. And then if you can distinguish with maybe testing what's driving it, and then you can enrich that population and get to, above 50%, 70, 80, 90% success. That's where ultimately you'll want to go. And then looking at the autoantibodies, if that is the only other etiology that's driving this, we have some ideas about how we could address that too for those people who it's not the viral persistence. So yes, 3CL is very much focused on this. We do have some very clear ideas about how to address it. It's a very, very important topic that we think is going to explode. We did see Tim Kaine actually introduce a bill to Congress about long COVID a couple of weeks ago. That just tells you how important this is becoming, because they're suffering from it. It's when politicians start to suffer from things, then, things happen. And we think as more and more people get COVID, and as a result, more and more people get long COVID, therefore, there's going to be a lot of interest in that. And just a note on that, we think that the antivirals, the good ones, we don't really think Merck is very good, but, Pfizer antiviral, for example, could also potentially reduce long COVID. So if that gets out there, or if our products get out there and you're taking them when you have COVID, you're less likely to get long COVID. And that could be one of the big reasons to drive people to take the antivirals when you have COVID in the acute phase to reduce the long COVID. So we saw that with vaccination. Obviously, if you're vaccinated, you have a lower likelihood of long COVID. We think that makes complete sense because it's like you have less virus in fewer places. And we think it's going to be the same with the antivirals.
Wow, good. Sly Brooks wants to know if there are any EUA activities going on in Greece and Israel.
So yes, we've got a CRO we're moving forward with in terms of supplying information and getting ready. I'm not sure if I mentioned this on one of our previous calls, but one of our board members actually met with the senior leadership in Greece, from the prime minister all the way down to the health minister, the finance minister, about the products. I can say that, we have sent bottles to high-ranking officials in the Greek government to use some of our Tolo branded products. And so that, that's something that's happened when people gotten COVID or have COVID. So, we are making progress. We are engaged. And obviously, we think that, to the extent that there's success, you could have, a pretty engaged government that wants to move more quickly.
Spencer Porter asks, will biomarker data from the phase 2 clinical trial be shared with investors? And when will the company publish journal articles on the phase 3 clinical trial results?
The phase 3, we have to run the phase 3 trial before we do it. So he probably meant the phase 2. So we're now, there is going to be another bite at the apple in terms of disclosing data related to the study. So that is, that data gathering process is ongoing now. We will be sharing those results, and we are planning for that phase 2-3, and we will be publishing. The timing of the publication is not 100% clear yet. The team here is obviously having just formed 3CL, and we've got a lot of consultants that we've been working with. Some are going to be transitioning to employees. So now is the phase where we're locking in the org chart for 3CL so that it can move forward. And then 3CL will be in a position where it's going to, go out and engage to get grants and other things. Obviously, we'll help it raise money and provide capital on an ongoing basis to allow it to further itself. So that, it's one of the things we're doing for the subsidiary, why it makes a lot of sense for us. So, that's kind of where things are at the moment. We have the pieces in place. They're getting really organized to be able to drive the progress forward. And, with the waves come, there's a lot of things that happen in the waves, and it's the troughs in the waves where a lot of the work gets done, and that's what's happening now.
Okay, thank you. Phil Cole says, as the virus becomes more and more infectious, isn't more viral load and 3CL produced in the body? So do you know if this will translate in the need for a stronger dose of Tolavir? And could this impact the clinical trials?
We don't think so, largely because, at least with everything we've seen so far in COVID, actually, the highest, you get higher viral loads at the beginning of the disease. Once you get the hyperimmune response, the immune response is actually starting to kill the COVID, and it's actually the immune response that's driving the negative outcomes, not necessarily the virus. And so the virus levels actually typically start to come down as you get into hospitalization. So we don't believe at the hospital stage that it would have that kind of impact. We do think, if that impact were to occur, it would be more at the earlier stages. And so that's more of a question of, for the first 5 days type of symptomatic issue where you're going to be treating, where that could have a significant impact. So no, we don't see that being a major problem. And also the binding that we have much more than overcomes what we've seen so far from any of these variants. So we don't really believe that there's any risk of losing that activity based on the materials and the inhibition activity that we have, whether it's Tolavir or Tolavir.
Okay. Dave H. says, we heard this week the COVID budget for Paxlovid might not get funding. That's 9.2 million doses that could be scrapped. So how does this political environment in the U.S. impact the company's ability to get the orders for Tolavir?
Well, it's a completely different market. So Tolavir is targeting the hospital market. It's important to remember that. The hospital market is not the outpatient market. And the hospital market is, in fact, the market that the CDC is focused on. Hospitalizations are the new metric. They don't care about cases. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me because obviously hospitalizations follow cases, not the other way around. With that said, that is the official policy. And so anything that can reduce hospitalizations or increase the throughput of people who ultimately get hospitalized so they can get out faster and unclog the system, that is where the government's resources are going to go. And so, you didn't hear anything about a reduction in remdesivir. You didn't hear that. You only heard about a reduction in the outpatient setting. And so that we agree that there's going to be an impact, which means probably more people are going to end up in the hospital. So for us, if you think about the hospital market, that will only increase the hospital market as compared to what it otherwise would have been. With that said, obviously, it's a very unfortunate situation that people aren't taking this seriously. And there's going to be some pretty dire consequences. But, that's up to the political leaders. That's not up to us. We're creating products to help people.
Terry asks, is one of the top priorities is extinguishing the convertible debt?
Obviously, it is. We recognize that that's an issue. Most of the convertible debt that the company had that shareholders are concerned about are relatively gone. There was a conversion recently, actually above market. Because the stuff that was below market is done, and the last set of conversion was actually above market because it's based on 100% of a trailing average. That was the acquisition, a note from the acquisition of Provista, and so at this point, the cost basis of these instruments is actually higher than the current price, and so. We think there is overhang, but the idea that there's a lot of people with cheap stocks selling out is no longer the case right now, and so we think that we're getting to a point, and we're in negotiations with them about getting ready to go to NASDAQ. We're not there in the NASDAQ yet, but we're getting ready to go to NASDAQ. We think that most of the investors clearly see now with what we've done with regards to revenue. They see Videssa now getting on a path because Jorge's done a lot of work, and we'll be making announcements with regards to that relatively soon. And they see now that 3CL protease assets are in, and we closed the transaction like we said we would, and we're beginning to engage, with regulators. I think there's a lot more upside than there is downside, and our investors see that.
Great. Mark Riley asks, where do you think the market cap of the company should be given your phase 2-3 status with Tolavir?
It's tough for me. I can't comment on, valuation and where it should be. I think it should be substantially higher. I think I can say that. And I can say that the valuations we have for the underlying assets that we have in our hands, exceed $1 billion. That I can say. But I can't say, what that means with regards to where the stock price should be, because there's a number of variables, a lot of which is sentiment. And sentiment right now isn't great because the price is down. And so, we're suffering from that. With that said, hopefully as we make progress and we do what we said we're going to do, although we have been late doing some of that, but we have done it and we'll continue to do it. We think that there is continued potential, and this idea that we're going to miss out on the pandemic because it's going away, I think that's clearly nonsense. But it is important for us to get to market as quickly as possible. That we agree with. And so, as we get additional data that allows us to say more things about our products that are on the market, we think we can drive sales. And as we get additional data, that we believe will further support potential EUAs, maybe the bar, will slide over the bar for certain governments who otherwise wouldn't have allowed us. Once they see this additional data, they will allow it. And in the meantime, we're preparing for phase 2-3. And so that, those are the steps. Obviously, it's been very challenging in this environment. The biotech market has been very, very challenging, even with companies, with hundreds of millions of dollars in cash. They're trading well below cash. They're getting punished. So that, we didn't anticipate that, and that certainly isn't helping us. But it doesn't matter. We're going to keep moving.
Michael Erdman's first wants to congratulate you and your whole team on your restructuring success. And his question is, how is Tolavir received in Israel and other countries, and is the product being bought?
So Tolavir is not for sale. Tolavir is a botanical drug product that will ultimately have to be sold most likely to governments. If you're asking about Tolavir, we do have an application in with the Ministry of Health in Israel, be able to actually launch Tolavir as a dietary supplement into the market in Israel. So Dorit and her team are working on that. We expect that that's going to go pretty well. We obviously have, through our partner T-Cell, an application in Europe to allow for Tolavir to be used through their brand T-Cell Protect. How long, the challenges in Europe on what you can say and how aggressive you can be with regards to marketing, that seems to be the question, because there's just so much out there on the internet with regards to people talking about Tolavir and what it's done for them, that we think there could be some pause as to whether or not this should be an OTC product in Europe as opposed to a dietary supplement product, and that could be having some impact with regards to the timing of the authorization to get the product on the market. So that's something our partners are dealing with. But we do, certainly in the soft launches in these other markets or when it's been used, just, giving it to people, there's been a lot of reception. And so we think as we get regulatory authorization and can market, we'll see upside.
We do have a lot of questions regarding Tolavir in Israel. Can you talk about why EUA has not been granted, and talk a little bit about the compassionate use case of Tolavir in Israel?
Yeah, so the compassionate use, people are using it. I can't disclose all the data, but suffice it to say people are continuing to use it because obviously they want to. With regards to other countries, we're moving forward on all these things. In Israel, it's particularly easy. Israel, you would typically need larger studies to get an approval. However, there is a mutual recognition between Israel and Europe, and if a European country gets approval, there's actually a law that allows for mutual recognition of that product in Israel, and so that's how we're looking at it. We believe that we can get more rapidly get an approval in Greece, which will then trigger an approval in Israel. That will probably be faster than focusing only on the data set we have now. We are gathering additional data, and so with that additional data, of course, we could see benefit, but we don't have that yet.
Well, concerning Israel, Drew Meyer wants to know if you can give any insight to what Tolavir in hospitalized cases will be priced at per dosing regimen.
As we mentioned, we're looking to proxy remdesivir. So I won't get into the exact pricing, but that's the benefit that we see. We see remdesivir had modicum of benefit in the hospitalized setting. It obviously had a price that was pretty hefty. We think if we come in with significantly better benefit, that we could be priced similarly, and that's our target.
And Ryan Bazoff wants to know a little bit more about Israel, but also what's the realistic time frame for an EUA in Greece and Israel with the results from your stage 2-3 trial? And also he wants to know, are there any active companies trying to partner with Todos? And you don't have to name any specifics if you can't. Yeah,
with regards to companies, yes. We do have a number of discussions ongoing in different jurisdictions. With regards to getting approval, we'll see. Once you submit, then it's when the fireworks start, and you really have those discussions and engage. And obviously, every nook and cranny of data that we'll have at that point will be helpful with regards to convincing regulators to give it a chance, at least get it on the market with some provisional basis and see if it performs. Those are very sophisticated conversations that our key regulatory people will be having with the different government agencies, and we look. There's not much out there. That's the good thing, not the bad thing, but the good thing for Tolavir. There's really not much out there when you boil it down, and so if your hospitals are getting full and you're talking about a product that has a very clear safety profile, we think it becomes challenging to say no. If people aren't getting benefit, if people aren't talking about the benefits, if this, you're getting bad vibes or whatever. I mean, obviously those things happen, but we think this is kind of a unique moment with what's going on with the coronavirus, and so we think that we may have a better chance than bookie odds makers would give us.
Okay. Dan Fleming says, in December, you mentioned the cash flow in the testing business was going to ease in January. So can you comment on the current cash flow of the testing business?
Sure. Yeah, we haven't put out our numbers yet, but we're almost out with our numbers. Yeah, of course, we expect, at this point, SARS-CoV-2 has become, at least based on the last 2 years, things may change, but it's become relatively cyclical. There's a huge spike over the holidays. It dies down in February, March. Some variant somewhere comes out and starts driving things in Europe, and then it comes in the springtime. It stays, maybe not as big as it was, over Christmas. It kind of stays. Then it spikes again around school. Then it comes down, and then it spikes, at the holidays again. So that seems to kind of be the pattern. That could obviously change because it's very unpredictable if there's a new variant that comes out of nowhere. But we do expect, and we're seeing it in Europe, and we're 3 to 4 weeks behind in Europe. We're seeing cases start to go up again. We're seeing hospitalizations start to go up again. We're seeing it in South Korea. We're seeing it in China. We're seeing it explode in China. And so we're preparing. We're preparing to capture that next wave that we see coming in the next 3 to 4 weeks. So yes, there was definitely a decline in testing, and February, March. What we're doing during this decline is we're consolidating other accounts. So we've got our key clinical people out there speaking to sample collection sites that aren't happy with the labs they were with because they didn't get the turnaround time, because they didn't have the capacity or the customer service or whatever the problem was. We're talking to large groups, government groups, about contracts. Is now what's happening, despite the drop in mandates, of vaccine mandates, the government is actually testing its employees quite a bit. And there are a lot of RFPs out there for federal government testing. And so we've been engaging on that. And we think, we didn't think the vaccine mandate would ultimately make a lot of sense for exactly the reason that, if a new variant comes along that overcomes the vaccine, it's going to be very difficult to convince people that you've got to get vaccinated. People don't want to get vaccinated, that they must get vaccinated to prevent against hospitalization and death. Really, the promise was against infection, and infection is critical. Hospitalization and death is very important, not getting away from that. But people were saying, well, you can still get it. And ultimately, that was the case at the Supreme Court when they shut down the mandate. They basically said, well, who are you protecting? If I can still get it and transmit it, even though I'm vaccinated, I'm not protecting my fellow person by being vaccinated. Now, that obviously may not be exactly true because there are reductions, but that was the argument. With regards to testing, I think that argument completely goes away. With regards to testing, you have it or you don't. The only problem is if you're using a lateral flow test that is not very sensitive. If you have a PCR test and you're screening with PCR testing, you're going to find people that are positive. And you're going to stop the chains of infection. You're going to stop the spread. So, our view is that at the end of the day, that's where it's headed. And so we're preparing for that.
Okay. Great answer. Brian Murphy has a question concerning Tolavir. What's the revenue number for these dietary products to date? And how many patents do you have in the testing pipeline? And Todos has over 900 million shares outstanding. So when do you see Todos exercising a reverse split?
So reverse split, we are not targeting a reverse split anytime soon. We do plan, we likely, maybe not, but we'll probably have to do one to get uplisted. That's the high likelihood. But we're not rushing to uplist at this point because, we recognize the issues associated with reversing before you're ready. So, we're focused on executing our game plan and not focused on a reverse right now. With regards to, the Tolavir, what was that first question again? Can you repeat?
The revenue number for the products to date?
Yeah. So we've done over $1 million. We'll disclose, all of this in filings, but I can say, without much concern, we've done well over $1 million. We got great margins on the Tolavir product. We are now preparing for that next leg of influencer campaign, and putting the pieces together for that and putting the marketing material together for that to be able to drive sales. And really the key is we need to amplify, Tolavir. We need to amplify, we need to get in front of people, so that they can learn about it, understand what it is, and get it in their medicine cabinet. And certainly with regards to, people who may have longer term issues that we're hearing from, like this long COVID community question I had before, we're now thinking about how best to market to those people, because obviously the more anecdotal evidence we get, the stronger the case is when we go to the regulators. And we just think there's just so many people out there with long COVID who have no solutions that that's a population in which this could take off like wildfire. So, the problem with Paxlovid, of course, is that you can't get it. One, there's not a lot of it. Two, you have to, it's really reserved for unvaccinated, immunocompromised people, which is almost everybody who's immunocompromised has been vaccinated by virtue of their risk profile. So it's really a small patient population. They're going to have to expand who they're allowed to give Paxlovid to. In the meantime, everybody else doesn't really have any options if they want to get their hands on a 3CL protease inhibitor. And so, Tolavid's it. So we think that, driving that message, and certainly we've seen kind of unbranded content about antivirals by Pfizer, which we love, because, they can't market Paxlovid because it's under emergency use, and under emergency use, you're not allowed to market. But you can do unbranded stuff where you talk about things in general. And when they do that, they're helping us also. And so, we're looking to leverage what's out there with regards to that kind of content to be able to drive traffic towards, our properties. And we'll be doing that, more robustly as time goes on.
Great. Well, Gerald, we are complete with our side of questions, but we've got quite a few from the audience, so we'll send them directly to you so you can answer on your own time. Would you like to give us some closing remarks?
I'd just like to thank everyone for taking the time. Obviously, we know that it's challenging executing in the OTC marketplace. And so, sometimes things take longer, and it's not our intent or our desire. But we appreciate you guys sticking with us, and we will look to set expectations a little better as time goes on.
Well, it's always fascinating to hear what you're up to, and you're full of information. And thank you so much for taking your time to be with us again today on our conference.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right, everyone. What a great day it's been. So remember, in just a second, you're going to be redirected to the registration page for our next conference. So stay on and reserve your spot early. On behalf of all of us at Emerging Growth, I want to thank all of our presenters and our attendees for making this Emerging Growth Conference such a great success. Remember that a complete replay of this conference, separated by company, is available on our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Emerging Growth Conference. Plus, you can follow us on Twitter. We always post new information to Twitter first. That's @EmergingGrowthC. I'm Anna Berry, and on behalf of myself and everyone who made this event possible today, we want to wish you a happy, healthy, and successful 2022, and we'll see you on our next conference. Thanks for joining us again.